Hello, this is Jeff Steiner from Americans in France. And today I am talking with Amanda Klekowski von Koppenfels. Amanda, are you there?
I am here, Jeff. Thanks so much
How
for
are
calling.
you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing all right. Now, we're talking about Amanda. You've done a survey of Americans overseas, I guess. What was the
hmm
title of your survey?
The title of my survey was The U.S. and You, and it's a follow-up from my 2014 book that was Migrants or Expatriates, and that was something that I wanted to learn a little bit more about.
And what did you learn? What did your survey? First of all, give us a little bit of background on the questions, what the goal of the survey, maybe.
Okay, well, I mean, this survey really was a follow-up from the study that led to this 2014 book of mine, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about how people interact with the U.S. government. When I did the research for my past book, FATCA had just been passed, and
Right.
it wasn't really an issue yet. People were starting to talk a little bit about it, but it hadn't yet become the issue that we know it as today. And so this survey really was something to try and gauge what was going on with FATCA. People have talked a lot about FATCA. People have made a lot of assumptions about the impact of FATCA on overseas Americans, and I wanted to find out what was actually going on. There'd been no research. Mine is the first academic study which actually looks at the interactions of overseas Americans with the U.S. government. To say the survey was never actually said the word FATCA because I wanted people to tell me that. I didn't want to make the assumption that it had anything to that people's interactions with the U.S. governments were being shaped by FATCA. It did, of course, turn out that FATCA was a very, very important factor in the way overseas Americans are interacting with the U.S. government today. But so a couple that was really the reason behind it, was to learn more, was to try and to put some actual data to so many of the assumptions that we hear today. A lot of the anecdotal stories that come out of reports that say, well, this is happening, that is happening. I wanted to actually put some data, some numbers onto it.
Behind it. Now, so what are some of the assumptions? For example, what were some of the assumptions that you wanted to talk about, or you wanted to investigate?
Well, I wanted to look a little bit more closely at this assumption that is so often said, that Americans are giving up their passports to avoid taxes. That is not the case. That is what came out very, very strongly. First of all, let me say, the survey is not a renunciation of citizenship survey. It was really looking at the interactions of people. And I have to say that the majority of my respondents to the survey, there are 1,500 respondents, and the majority have ties of varying strengths with the United States. 80% had been back to visit in the past year. Two-thirds had been back a couple times or more. Two-thirds voted in the 2012 presidential election. And so people have ties that are political, that are family ties, cultural, economic. And about one-third of them said they are actively looking into renouncing U.S. citizenship.
Wow.
That doesn't.
Go on.
About one-third are actively looking into renouncing U.S. citizenship. That does not mean that they are in the process of doing so. Many of them have doubts. Many of them are not sure about it. But a third said they're actively looking into it. And 3% said they're in the process of doing so.
Because it's yeah.
That means that two-thirds are not interested in renouncing U.S. citizenship. So that's just something I want to make clear, that this was something that the large majority of the respondents are not looking into this.
They're not looking into it. No. Was that surprising?
Well, there were no data on this. There was one study that had come up by a financial services group that showed quite high percentages, but that was a study that was specifically of financial clients, and so there were no data. We had no data on this. And so when we look at media reports, it sounds as if this is this enormous wave of Americans giving up their passports. So we had no data. This is the first data that we have. And so yes, surprising, no, not surprising, because it was good data to have. But the main surprise, I'd say, was that income was not a factor in people thinking about renouncing U.S. citizenship. That's something that is one of the assumptions that often came out before this, and that was something that did surprise me.
When you say income, you mean people having to pay taxes?
when I say income, I mean the level of household income that an individual has.
Yeah, because I saw that in your survey. In fact, most people it's under $100,000, meaning that they're exempt. There's I forget what it's called, but there's an exemption where you don't have to pay. The government doesn't consider that quote unquote income if you make under that threshold.
That's exactly right. Yep. And so most people, because I had a number of open-ended responses in my survey where people could write their responses and tell me what they were thinking. And most people don't actually owe taxes to the U.S. government. No. What they have to do is pay high accountant's fees in order to be able to produce the paperwork to tell the U.S. government that they don't owe any taxes.
Yeah, to me,
that's where the cost comes in.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're doing this a few days before tax day, at least for Americans in America. You know, in America, overseas Americans have a few months later. But yeah, I mean, that's what I'm thinking about too. I mean, in the paperwork, it's really a pain. I mean, just as we both know, right? We both know that. We both realize that. So.
Yeah, that's right. And it turns out that for people who are lower income, I talked to one woman who spends a month's salary on an accountant's fee.
Wow.
And so that's a lot of money. But more than that, it's also there are threats of very strong penalties, of very, very large penalties. And I talk to people who are very, 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 I say, panic-stricken that they're going to do something wrong and be assessed a penalty. And it's something that it's not just paperwork. This is things that, again, it's a sort of a month's salary. It is a foreign spouse's income now having to be listed.
Yeah.
FATCA also says that any government that is, FATCA now says that any business that is 10% or more American-owned must also be reported. So if you're an American living in France and you are a part owner of a government, I keep saying that, a part owner of a small business, that small business suddenly has to report to the U.S. government, which means that some businesses are starting to think twice about offering Americans ownership shares in businesses. Volunteer organizations that have Americans as treasurers are going to have to must report to the U.S. government.
Yeah.
So these are the types of things that are going on.
I heard about that. I heard about somebody with an Anglican minister in the UK who was wondering if he had to declare his bank accounts.
Right.
So it's really that's FBAR, but anyway, it is.
FATCA now requires that as well.
So FATCA requires that as well. No, it is, and I think it's right when you say that about people being worried, because I am too. I had made an error in my FBAR last year, so what do you do, right? And the FBAR, you have to say how much was in the account, and it's like, well, that's different. I'm saying that's difficult too, to get an understanding of how much money was in your account at a certain time in U.S. dollars when the account's going to be in some other currency. So.
No, right, exactly.
Very, very, very different. Was there any difference between Americans and quote unquote former Americans? With any sense of the people that you talked to that had given up? What were the motivations?
Well, there are two broad groups of people, I'd say. One group of people are those Americans who were born in the U.S., lived in the U.S. for a lot of years, moved away as adults, have lived abroad for a lot of years, but they're still very strongly American. And they really struggle with this idea of my French spouse, his income is now being looked at by the U.S. government, and that's something that's causing problems in our marriage. That's sort of one, for instance, issue that came up. The other issue is what they call themselves the accidental Americans, or border babies. A lot of these are Canadians who were born in the U.S. because their parents were in the U.S. for a few months, or maybe the nearest hospital was actually in the U.S. instead of in Canada. And so they're born in the U.S., and so they're a U.S. citizen. And they've never used that U.S. passport. They've never thought about being American. And then suddenly, because they have a U.S. place of birth, as adults, they realize that they have financial obligations to the U.S. government that they had never thought about. And many of those folks feel a very strong sense of anger that the U.S. government is interfering in what they view as Canadian citizens' business.
Right,
Because
right.
they're Canadian citizens. And so that's one group of people who have given up their passports, and who really want people to understand that it has nothing to do with loyalty. It has nothing to do with sort of lack of respect. All it is they feel that they are Canadian citizens and that this is interference of another government in their private lives. And they have been trying to get rid of U.S. citizenship, and it turns out to be a very difficult procedure for a lot of people.
It's a difficult procedure, and it's now gotten very expensive.
Yep. Well, it has gotten very expensive, and that is something that means that for people who are lower income, they are stuck between paying those high accountant's fees and not being able to come up with $4,000 is a lot of money for a lot of people.
Yeah.
They just can't come up with that kind of money.
So basically, I mean, what you found out was that a lot of this is really affecting people. It's not an issue of somebody trying to evade taxes. It's the hassle of having to deal with all this paperwork.
I mean, that's right. It's not trying to evade taxes, but it's more than just the hassle of paperwork. There are some people who have a certain income who can hire an accountant, hire a tax attorney, and have it dealt with. For other people who don't have the ability to pay for an accountant or a tax attorney, or aren't able to find one because they might live in a remote area, this is much more than hassle. This is something that causes sleepless nights, sends people into depression, causes problems in marriages. It's not just hassle. I mean, that makes it sound like it's sort of what everybody knows around April 15th.
Yeah,
and it's more than that. It's much more than that, is what I found out.
Yeah, no, you're right. Hassle makes it just sound like, something you have to do, but you can do. But yeah, no, it's true. It's true, because I got to do my taxes, and I already did my FBARs. But it's true. It's true, because it can be a real honestly, the word hassle can be it's a big problem for people. And it's not about. I think that's the interesting thing, is that this was all meant to go after the big tax cheats or whoever. The big guy, everybody thinks it's the people who are trying to evade taxes, and it's really affecting the little people.
That's pretty much right. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.
No problem. I'm going to have the link to the. Are you going to publish your study? I'm going to ask you.
I am. This is going to be a book, but that's going to be probably 2-3 years down the road. But yes.
Yeah. Okay. No, because I have on my website, Americans in France, I have your press release. Mm-hmm. It's very popular on Facebook, and I will definitely. It's already linked to. It'll be linked to from the page where you find this, either on YouTube or on my website. Well, thank you very much, Amanda. It's been very nice talking with you.
A pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.